Oh, hey there. Welcome back to Wicked Whimsy. Today we're going to be talking about Haunted Mansion and kind of my thoughts about the movie. Now, I went and saw it last night, and I wanted to get this review out there while my thoughts are still fresh. So, to start out, if you are a Haunted Mansion fan, go see this movie. Without any question, you have to go see this movie. It is made for you. If you love the ride and the atmosphere that Haunted Mansion brings, this movie will serve its purpose more than enough, and you will more likely than not enjoy the entire 2 hours of this movie. The set design is beautiful, the costume design is astounding, and the characters are well acted and very likable. As a Haunted Mansion fan, this movie is so easy to love. Now let's look at this movie just a little more critically. So outside of those who are Haunted Mansion fans or big Disneyland fans, how are they going to receive this film? Well, this movie does really well in some areas and not so well in others. For example, while every actor in this movie does a really fantastic job of portraying their characters, all of their characters are very paper thin. In fact, the entire theme of the movie is very superficial. There's not much depth to it, but the actors do such a good job at portraying these characters that you don't mind spending this time with them. And in my opinion, it almost does make up for the superficial script that is handed to them. Now, if I were to get into some of the standouts of the cast, which is really hard to do because, like I said earlier, they all are very likable. Lakeith Stanfield is going to be my number one standout. He plays the lead role of Ben, who's dealing with a lot of grief and trauma from his wife passing away. And we see the theme of grief so often done in spooky movies or horror movies. This movie's not really horror, it's more of a spooky adventure, I would say. But Lakeith Stanfield's performance merits the presence of the theme of grief, because oftentimes it just feels so overdone, and even if you go and see this movie and you're like, oh, it's grief again, it's hard not to enjoy the way that Lakeith Stanfield portrays this character. The next standout I want to mention is Owen Wilson. He is by far the funniest character in this entire movie, and that's hard to say because there's a lot of comedy actors in this movie, and they are all very entertaining and funny, but I laughed the most at Owen Wilson and his portrayal of Father Kent. He landed his line delivery most of the time, and I enjoyed every minute with him on screen. Now, not every joke in this movie landed, but that's okay because a lot of them did, and even if it didn't hit just right, it didn't take me out of the movie at all. So if you're going into this looking for the humor, I think that you'll really enjoy it. Now, it is kind of cheesy, goofy humor, but it's lovable. It's like the jokes that your dad makes in the kitchen, you know, and it's hard not to laugh a little at some corny, family-friendly humor. So I did really enjoy that aspect of the movie. Another performance I really want to commemorate is Chase W. Dillon. He plays Travis in this movie, which is the little kid, and oh my god, was it so refreshing to see a little kid actor who wasn't written to be dumbed down because they're a little kid. That's honestly one of my biggest complaints with movies that cast little kids in them or have little kid characters. Often they're treated like they're idiots, and kids are not idiots. Not only is Chase W. Dillon's character written well, but oh my god, is he acted well. I believed his performance, and that was really impressive to see, because it's not something you see too often with kids in movies, and that's okay, because like, it's not the kid's fault, right? You can't expect professional level acting from a child, and often I'm not much of a supporter of child acting unless the child really wants to do it. But a lot of the times you see some issues with the studios there. Anyway, Chase W. Dillon did great as Travis. He was really a standout to me. Now, one character I want to talk about whose performance could have used some improvement was Jared Leto's Hatbox Ghost, or Alistair Crump. Now, he wasn't bad by any means. He was enjoyable. He had an intimidating presence. The idea and concept behind a ghost who haunts ghosts I think is really cool, but it just wasn't my favorite. Now, a couple of the line deliveries from Jared Leto were a few of the main reasons that I cringed here and there in the movie, but overall, he was just mediocre. And this is almost heartbreaking to say because the Hatbox Ghost is not only mine, but a lot of people's favorite ghosts from the Haunted Mansion ride. And so to see him kind of be almost a little forgettable was tricky, but I am excited that we got to see him on the big screen. That was really cool. And the costume design again was it was really great for him. And yeah, that's mostly what I have to say about that character. The visual effects were pretty good on the Hatbox Ghost. I would have loved to see if they had done the makeup and then put visual effects over it, because his face, especially when it was out of the Hatbox, it actually looked pretty good. So I would be really interested to see behind the scenes, to see if they actually put on some makeup. On the topic of the visual effects, they were inconsistent throughout, and this is one of my critiques, is that a lot of the time I really enjoyed what they were doing with the visual effects. Especially, there's this item in the movie that allows the main cast, the main ensemble, to see ghosts. And I thought that take on seeing the ghosts in that way was really unique, and the way that the ghosts looked through this object is actually really cool. I dug it, because it was like, it almost reminded me of being a little kid and going on YouTube and seeing those "can you see this in the picture" videos where they like show a picture of a haunted building and there's like a little face in the corner. Now, that's not exactly what these ghosts look like in this movie, but the reason it kind of reminds me of that is because when they're looking at the ghost through this object, most times it doesn't give you a lot of time to process exactly what you're looking at, so you just catch the glimpse of their face and then it cuts. And I thought that was really cool. But then later on in the movie, you start to see the ghosts in their fully realized forms, which also was really good. Now, you can tell that there was a lot of practical makeup and practical effects, and those were fantastic. My only complaint with the visual effects is that sometimes I feel like they added a little bit too much CGI that took away from the experience of the movie. It took away from the practicality of the sets sometimes, or the way that the spirits look, and that's okay. I mean, overall, visually, the movie was really well done. It was pretty to look at, and so I don't have a huge complaint there, only a little one. Probably my number one complaint with the visual effects, though, is Madame Leota. Now, I could be so wrong about this because I haven't seen it in a while, but I'm pretty sure I like the 2003 Madame Leota effects better than the Jamie Lee Curtis one. The Jamie Lee Curtis Madame Leota, especially when she's in the crystal ball, is almost on the line between Uncanny Valley and good CGI. It's just not quite there. It feels plastic, and that did draw me out of the experience for a minute. It took me out of the movie for a second, just like looking at this almost plastic head of Jamie Lee Curtis. But I soon got over it. I just wish that it was a little bit better. And I guess on the topic of Jamie Lee Curtis as Madame Leota, she wasn't my favorite. I actually like Jennifer Tilly a little bit better in the 2003 movie. And that's hard to say because I love Jamie Lee Curtis. She's one of my favorite actresses out there. And I was not super feeling her character, her Madame Leota portrayal. It was better than Jared Leto's Hatbox Ghost in my opinion, but not by much. They were nearly on par with each other, and like I said earlier, it wasn't bad, it was just okay. Another critique I have here is the pacing. Now this was the weirdest part of the movie for me, because it feels like at the beginning of the movie, they're rushing to get everybody in the mansion to kind of jump into the main plot line of the movie. It's a little disorienting because as soon as you see somebody walk into the mansion, immediately there's just ghosts. And it just kind of took me out of it for a second. I wasn't expecting to jump into the movie that fast. And then it was even a little more jarring when, like, halfway through the movie, there's this point where it just kind of lulls. It just digs itself into the ground and drags for a little bit, and that part is probably going to be the hardest for most people to overcome. So the beginning and the middle of the movie were the hardest parts of the movie for me to get through, and it does hurt its rewatchability just a little bit. But I think if you can get over the pacing issues that this movie has, then you'll really enjoy the film. After everyone is introduced and they're all in the mansion together, the entirety of them interacting in the first half of the movie is widely entertaining. It's so fun to watch. And then after that middle point that kind of drags a little bit, once that starts to dissolve back into the original plot of the movie, then the pacing is consistent from there on out and it's still enjoyable. And even in that part that drags a little bit, we get two of my favorite performances, and the reason they're my favorite is because you can tell how much fun they're having on set. It's Winona Ryder and Dan Levy's characters. They don't have a big role in the movie at all. They're almost like cameos, but I really enjoyed every second they were on screen. It is just that area of the movie that does drag a little bit. So this movie could definitely use some tuning up with its pacing. And speaking of tuning up, let's talk about the tunes. The soundtrack was mostly on point. I really liked most of the soundtrack. I had a really great time. One of the first pieces in the movie is performed by the Soul Rebels, and it's called His Soul Left Gloss on the Rose, and it's one of the best iterations of the Haunted Mansion theme I've ever heard in my life. Now, the Soul Rebels are a New Orleans soul jazz band. They also dabble in some hip-hop and some pop. They kind of mix all those genres together. Go check them out. They're amazing. And then the man who did the score of the movie is Chris Bowers, and he is also a jazz pianist. I don't know if he's from New Orleans, but he started as a jazz pianist, and then he moved on to film and TV scores. And he really hit the mark on the Haunted Mansion score in this movie. He took the few songs that you get from the Haunted Mansion ride and he integrated them in really fun ways, and I think it elevated the experience of the movie for me. The only critique I have with the soundtrack is when they're explaining the backstory of the main villain. And I don't know why, but they do like Haunted Mansion theme breakcore almost, and it just took me out of the movie completely. I was like, what is going on here with the music? Like, what are we listening to? It just didn't fit. That was my only issue with the score, really. If you're curious what I'm talking about, you can go listen to it on Spotify. The song is called Alistair Crump on the Haunted Mansion album, but it's just really bad. The rest of the soundtrack is great though, so it's hard to dock it a lot for that. But yeah, when it comes down to it, this movie really is a must-watch for any Haunted Mansion film. It has so many Easter eggs to the ride and even the 2003 movie that if you are a Haunted Mansion fan, there's just so much to appreciate. If you're somebody out there who enjoys a good, fun Halloween spooky movie that's not too scary, it's suitable for all ages, you will also enjoy this movie. Now, you may feel the pacing issues a bit more than I did. I didn't really feel the pacing issues because I was so excited to spend 2 hours in the Haunted Mansion universe, as it is one of my favorite properties of all time. You'll hear people calling it baby's first horror, and I think that's a really great description of it. It'll kind of almost initiate your kids into watching spooky movies if you want them to enjoy them with you down the line, which is pretty cool. Like when I was a kid, I was initiated into it with Nightmare Before Christmas, and that movie has stuck with me since. And I could see this movie kind of being that kid's first steps. Now, for those of you out there who wouldn't particularly go out of your way on any given day to just watch a spooky movie, probably wait for this one to hit streaming. You may have a lot harder of a time being entertained for the full 2 hours and getting through this movie than us crazy Haunted Mansion fans. So just wait till October. It'll most likely hit Disney Plus then, and maybe you can put it on in the background while you're doing a fun Halloween craft or Halloween cooking, or just hanging out with some friends, or putting a movie on for your kids. Final rating for this movie, I'm gonna give it a 6.5 out of 10 for anyone who isn't a Haunted Mansion fan, and an 8.5 out of 10 for anyone who is a Haunted Mansion fan. That's gonna about do it for today. Did you go see this movie? And if you did, what did you think about it? And if you haven't seen this movie, are you going to? Let me know in the comments down below. Remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and we will definitely catch you in the next one.